The gunshot that shattered Martha Fairchild's engagement also shattered every expectation her family had carefully constructed around her future. And as she stood in the dusty street of Lone Pine, California in 1883, with her belongings scattered at her feet, she realized that freedom tasted like iron and desert wind. Her former fiancé, Richard Sullivan, had made his position abundantly clear just hours earlier in front of half the town. Martha had dared to negotiate the sale of 3 horses she had trained herself, refusing to let Richard handle the transaction as he insisted a proper wife should. The buyer, a rancher from Bishop, had offered her top dollar and respect, 2 things Richard apparently found intolerable in a woman who was supposed to become his property in mere weeks. "You are too headstrong, too independent, too unwilling to submit to a husband's guidance," Richard had announced, his face red with humiliation. "I cannot marry a woman who insists on conducting business like a man. Our engagement is terminated." Martha had expected tears to come, but instead she felt something closer to relief washing through her body. She looked at the man she had promised to marry and saw a stranger who had never really known her at all. "Then I suppose we both dodged a bullet, Richard. I wish you well in finding a woman willing to pretend she has no mind of her own." The scandal had spread through Lone Pine faster than wildfire through sagebrush. By evening, Martha found herself standing outside the boarding house where she had lived before the engagement, her trunk and 2 carpetbags containing everything she owned in the world. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, had wrung her hands apologetically but firmly explained that she could not house a woman of Martha's now questionable reputation. A broken engagement, particularly one caused by the woman's unwillingness to be properly submissive, was simply too scandalous. Martha was 23 years old, alone, and rapidly running out of options in a town that had decided she was a cautionary tale rather than a person. She stood on the wooden sidewalk as the October sun began its descent behind the Sierra Nevada mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if her circumstances were not so dire. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a place to think," a voice said from behind her. Martha turned to find Sarah Chen, who ran a small restaurant on the edge of town. Sarah was one of the few Chinese immigrants in Lone Pine, a woman who had carved out her own existence through sheer determination after her husband died in a mining accident 5 years earlier. They had spoken occasionally, 2 women who understood what it meant to operate outside the narrow confines society tried to impose. "I appreciate the kindness, but I am not sure I can afford even a meal at present," Martha admitted, her pride stinging but her practical nature winning out. Sarah shook her head. "Come, we will discuss payment after you eat. I have a proposition that might interest you." The restaurant was small but immaculately clean, with 6 tables covered in red checkered cloths. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread made Martha's stomach clench with hunger. She had not eaten since breakfast, too consumed with the drama of her dissolving future to think about something as mundane as food. Sarah brought her a plate of beef stew with thick slices of sourdough bread and sat down across from her. "I need help," she said directly. "The restaurant does well, but I cannot manage both the cooking and the serving alone. I need someone who can handle customers, manage accounts, and is not afraid of hard work. The position includes a small room above the restaurant and meals. The pay is modest, but you would have independence." Martha felt something loosen in her chest. "Why would you offer this to me? Especially now with my reputation." Sarah's expression was knowing. "Because I understand what it means to be judged for refusing to disappear. Because you have a spine, and that is more valuable than most people realize." and because I need someone competent, not someone docile." "Then I accept," Martha said without hesitation. "When do I start?" "Your belongings are on the street, yes. We bring them in now. You start tomorrow morning, but tonight you eat and rest." For the first time that day, Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. She had lost a fiancé, and a future she had been trying to convince herself she wanted, but perhaps she had gained something more valuable in return. The next morning, Martha woke before dawn in the small room above the restaurant. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the eastern Sierra. She dressed in a simple calico dress and apron, pinned her dark blonde hair into a practical bun, and descended the narrow stairs to begin her new life. Sarah was already in the kitchen, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared the day's bread. "The morning customers arrive soon," she explained. "Mostly men heading to the mines or the ranches. They want coffee, eggs, bacon, and to be left alone unless they need something. Some will test you because you are new and because you are the woman Richard Sullivan rejected. Do not let them see weakness." Martha nodded, understanding the dynamics immediately. The Wild West had its own brutal honesty. Weakness was exploited, but strength, even in a woman, could earn a grudging respect. The first customers began trickling in as the sun crested the mountains. Martha poured coffee, took orders, and delivered food with efficient professionalism. Most of the men barely looked at her, more interested in their meals than gossip. A few made pointed comments about independent women and the trouble they caused, but Martha ignored them with the same ease she had developed ignoring mosquitoes on summer evenings. Then Harrison Kane walked in, and the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Martha had seen him around town before but had never spoken to him. He was a cowboy who worked for the Double K Ranch, one of the larger cattle operations in the Owens Valley. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the sky just before a storm. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. But there was something thoughtful in his expression that suggested there was more going on behind those eyes than most people suspected. He took a seat at the table by the window and removed his hat, revealing hair pressed flat from hours under the brim. When Martha approached with coffee, he looked up at her with open curiosity but no judgment. "Morning," he said. "I hear Sarah finally got some help. Good for her. Running this place alone was going to work her into an early grave." "What can I get you?" Martha asked, keeping her tone professional. "Eggs, bacon, biscuits if there are any fresh, and I appreciate you keeping my coffee cup full. Going to be a long day moving cattle to higher pasture." Martha nodded and turned to place his order, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Fairchild." She turned back, tensing slightly. Here it comes, she thought. The comments about her broken engagement, her improper behavior, her unwillingness to be the woman Richard Sullivan wanted. But Harrison's expression was serious, not mocking. "I just wanted to say that what Richard did was the act of a small man threatened by capability. You are better off without him." The kindness in his words, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed. "That is generous of you to say." "Not generous, just true." He picked up the newspaper someone had left on the table, signaling the conversation was over, but Martha found herself glancing at him as she moved around the restaurant, intrigued despite herself. Harrison became a regular fixture at the restaurant over the following weeks. He came in most mornings before heading out to the ranch, sometimes for lunch if he was working near town, and occasionally for dinner if the day had run long. He was unfailingly polite, tipped well despite clearly not having money to spare, and treated both Sarah and Martha with the same respectful courtesy. Martha found herself looking forward to his visits, though she tried to convince herself it was simply because he was a pleasant customer. He often read while he ate, which she appreciated. There was something appealing about a man who valued books as much as he did horses and cattle. One morning in early November, Harrison arrived later than usual, and Martha could see immediately that something was wrong. He was moving stiffly, and there was a tear in his shirt sleeve that revealed a bandage underneath. "What happened?" she asked as she poured his coffee. "Nothing worth discussing. Had a disagreement with a steer that did not want to be branded. The steer won the first round." "Let me see it," Martha said, her tone brooking no argument. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "I am fine." "Let me see it, or I will assume you are foolish enough to let a wound fester and will inform Sarah that we should refuse to serve you on the grounds that your decision-making is too poor to trust." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That is quite a threat." But he rolled up his sleeve to reveal a nasty gash that someone had bandaged, but not particularly well. Martha shook her head. "Wait here." She went into the back room where Sarah kept a proper medical kit, remnants from her husband's mining days when injuries were common. When she returned, she efficiently cleaned and rebandaged the wound while Harrison watched her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are good at that," he observed. "My mother was the closest thing to a doctor in our town back in Nevada before we moved here. I learned from her." Martha tied off the bandage and met his eyes. "You should change this daily and keep it clean. Infection out here can kill you just as surely as a bullet." "Yes, madam," Harrison said, and there was something in his tone that made her heart skip unexpectedly. As November progressed into December, Martha settled into her new life with a contentment that surprised her. The work was hard, the hours long, but she went to bed each night exhausted and satisfied in a way she never had when her days were filled with social calls and embroidery, and pretending to be less intelligent than she was for Richard's comfort. Sarah proved to be not just an employer but a friend. They worked together with an efficiency born of mutual respect, and in the evenings, they often sat together reviewing the account books or discussing how to improve the business. Sarah had dreams of expanding, perhaps adding more tables or offering a wider menu, and she valued Martha's input in a way that made her feel genuinely useful. The town's attitude toward Martha shifted gradually. The scandal of her broken engagement faded as people realized she was not going to slink away in shame, but instead was working hard and causing no trouble. A few of the women even began greeting her on the street, curiosity overcoming propriety. One afternoon, Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, came into the restaurant and specifically sat in Martha's section. "I wanted to apologize," Mrs. Peterson said quietly. "When I heard about your engagement ending, I assumed the worst. I see now that I was wrong to judge without knowing the full story." Martha was taken aback by the candor. "Thank you for saying so. That means more than you might realize." "My daughter is 17, Mrs. Peterson continued. "She is bright, so bright, and I worry constantly about dimming that brightness to make her acceptable to potential husbands. Seeing you forge your own path has given me hope that perhaps there are other options for girls like her." The conversation stayed with Martha for days. She had not considered that her choices might matter to anyone beyond herself, that her refusal to disappear might actually mean something to other women watching from the sidelines of their own constrained lives. Winter settled over the Owens Valley with its particular high desert character. The days were often sunny but cold, the nights frigid enough to freeze water solid. The Sierra Nevada mountains to the west became snow-covered giants, beautiful and imposing. The restaurant stayed busy, with people seeking hot food and warm refuge from the biting wind. Harrison's visits became the highlight of Martha's days, though she was careful not to let it show. They had developed an easy rapport, conversations flowing naturally between them about everything from politics to literature to the peculiar challenges of life in the West. She learned that he had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 sons, and had come to California seeking his own path rather than living in his brother's shadows. He had been working ranches for 8 years, saving money with the dream of eventually buying his own land. "What would you do with your own ranch?" Martha asked one quiet afternoon when the restaurant was empty except for him. Harrison considered the question seriously, as he did most things. "Run cattle, yes, but also breed horses. Good horses, the kind that have sense as well as speed. Too many people breed for looks and forget that a horse needs intelligence to be truly valuable." He paused. "What about you? If you could do anything, build any future, what would it be?" No one had ever asked her that before. Richard had told her what their future would be. Her parents had planned her life in careful detail, but no one had ever asked what she wanted. "I think I would want what I have now," she said slowly. "The ability to work, to use my mind, to be valued for my capability rather than my compliance. Maybe expand the restaurant or start another business. I am good with numbers, with accounts. I would like to prove that a woman can build something lasting." Harrison looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You will. I have no doubt about that." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then the door opened, bringing a rush of cold air and other customers, and the spell broke. Christmas approached, and the town prepared for the holiday with the particular enthusiasm of people whose lives were hard enough that celebrations mattered deeply. Sarah decided to close the restaurant for Christmas Day itself, a rare luxury, and she encouraged Martha to accept an invitation to spend the day with the Peterson family. "You need community," Sarah said firmly. "I will spend the day with the other Chinese families. You should not be alone." Martha agreed, though part of her wondered if Harrison would come looking for his morning coffee and be disappointed to find the restaurant closed. She scolded herself for the thought. He was a customer, nothing more, even if her heart insisted otherwise. Christmas morning was clear and cold, the kind of day where every breath felt sharp in the lungs. Martha walked to the Peterson house carrying a basket of Sarah's almond cookies as a gift, her best dress carefully pressed and her winter coat buttoned against the chill. The day was pleasant, filled with good food and conversation. The Peterson daughter, Emily, peppered Martha with questions about running the restaurant and managing money, and whether it was terribly scandalous to work for wages. Martha answered honestly, and Mrs. Peterson watched with approval. But as the afternoon wore on, Martha found her mind wandering to a tall cowboy with storm-colored eyes. She wondered where he was spending Christmas, whether he was lonely, whether he thought of her even a fraction as often as she thought of him. She got her answer the day after Christmas when Harrison came into the restaurant carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I hope you had a good Christmas," he said, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to give you this, but I was not sure if it would be appropriate." Martha took the package with trembling fingers. "You did not have to get me anything. I wanted to." His eyes searched her face. "Open it." Inside was a book, a beautiful leather-bound copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Martha ran her fingers over the cover, deeply touched. Books were expensive, a luxury that his wages would make a real sacrifice. "I heard you tell Sarah that you missed having books to read," Harrison explained. "And I thought you might like Whitman. He writes about independence and finding your own path. Seemed appropriate." Martha looked up at him, and something in his expression made her bold. "This is the kindest gift anyone has ever given me. Thank you, Harrison." It was the first time she had used his given name, and she saw him register it, saw the way his eyes softened. "Would you like to take a walk with me?" he asked. "After your shift ends, I know it is cold, but I would like to talk to you, really talk to you." "I would like that very much," Martha said, her heart hammering. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. When the last customer finally left and Sarah shooed her out with a knowing smile, Martha grabbed her coat and found Harrison waiting outside. They walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and the mountains loomed massive against the darkening sky. For a while neither spoke, the silence comfortable but weighted with expectation. Finally, Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "I need to tell you something, and I am going to do it badly because I have never been good with words, but I need you to hear it anyway." Martha nodded, hardly daring to breathe. "I have been watching you since you started working at Sarah's restaurant," Harrison continued. "Actually, I had noticed you before that, but you were engaged and it was not my place. But I watched how you held your head high after Richard humiliated you. I watched you work hard without complaint, build a new life without asking for anyone's pity. I watched you be kind to Sarah and patient with difficult customers and smart about everything you touched. And somewhere in all that watching, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the cold air between them, and Martha felt her entire world shift on its axis. "I know I am just a cowboy with more ambition than money," Harrison went on, the words coming faster now. "I know you have every reason to be done with men and marriage and all of it. But I need you to know that I see you, Martha. Not the woman Richard wanted you to be, not the woman this town thinks you should be, but the woman you actually are. And I admire your strength. I admire everything about you. I am not asking you to give up your independence or your work or your dreams. I am asking if maybe I could be part of them." Martha felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of a happiness so intense it bordered on pain. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon or too complicated or too risky. But I love you, Harrison Kane. I love the way you treat people with respect regardless of who they are. I love that you read books and think about ideas and are not threatened by a woman who does the same. I love that you have never once tried to make me smaller." Harrison closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "Can I kiss you, please?" Martha whispered. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. It was nothing like the chaste kisses Richard had occasionally bestowed on her like favors. This was passion and promise and the beginning of something real. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. I want to do this right." "Then court me," Martha said. "But Harrison, I am not giving up my work. That needs to be clear from the start." "I would never ask you to," he replied firmly. "Your capability is part of who you are. I fell in love with all of you, not some diminished version." They walked back to town holding hands, and Martha felt a joy so pure it seemed to light her up from the inside. She had lost the future she thought she was supposed to want, and had found instead a future she actually did want, with a man who valued her for exactly who she was. The town noticed the courtship immediately, of course. In a place as small as Lone Pine, privacy was a luxury no one truly possessed. Some of the gossips tusked about Martha moving too quickly from one man to another, but most people recognized what was happening for what it was. Two people well-matched finding each other. Richard Sullivan, for his part, made the mistake of confronting Harrison at the saloon one evening in early January. Martha heard about it secondhand from one of the ranch hands who came in for breakfast the next morning, his eyes bright with the drama of it all. Sullivan said it was an insult, you courting his former fiancée, the ranch hand reported. Said you were taking his leavings like a dog scavenging scraps. Martha's hands tightened on the coffee pot. What happened? Harrison did not even raise his voice, the ranch hand said admiringly. Just looked at him calm as Sunday morning and said that Martha Fairchild was nobody's leavings, that she was the finest woman in the Owens Valley, and that Sullivan was a fool who would spend the rest of his life regretting that he had not been man enough to appreciate her. Then he walked out, left Sullivan sputtering into his whiskey. Sarah, listening from the kitchen doorway, caught Martha's eye and nodded approvingly. "That is a good man," she said simply. The courtship progressed through winter and into spring. Harrison came to the restaurant when he could, often exhausted from long days working cattle, but always making time for Martha. On her occasional days off, they went riding together, Martha on a mare she had trained before the broken engagement and Harrison on his sturdy gelding. They talked endlessly, discovering shared values and complementary dreams. He met her family when her parents came to visit in March, a meeting Martha dreaded, but that turned out better than expected. Her father, a practical man who had never quite understood Richard's appeal, took to Harrison immediately. Her mother was more reserved, still smarting from the social embarrassment of the broken engagement, but even she had to admit that Harrison treated Martha with genuine respect. "He is not what I envisioned for you," her mother admitted privately. "But he looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look genuinely happy. I suppose that matters more than I realized." In April, Harrison took Martha to see the land he was hoping to buy, a piece of property north of town with good water and grazing. It needed work, but Martha could see the potential immediately. She walked the property with him, discussing where buildings might go, how to manage water rights, what crops might supplement cattle income. "You see it too," Harrison said, watching her face. "You see what it could be." "I do," Martha agreed. "But Harrison, I want to keep working with Sarah. At least for a while. The restaurant matters to me." "Then we will figure it out," Harrison said. "Maybe we live in town to start and I work the land during the day, or maybe you work part-time, or maybe something neither of us has thought of yet. We will find a way that works for both of us." In May, Harrison proposed properly, going to Martha's father to ask permission first in deference to tradition, then presenting Martha with a simple gold band because diamonds were beyond his means. "Martha Fairchild, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" he asked, down on one knee in the restaurant after closing time, Sarah watching from the kitchen with happy tears in her eyes. "I promise to respect your independence, value your strength, and love you for exactly who you are for the rest of my life." "Yes," Martha said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him soundly. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in June on a perfect Sierra morning, the ceremony held outdoors with the mountains as their cathedral. Sarah stood up with Martha, and one of Harrison's fellow ranch hands served as best man. The gathering was small but genuine, composed of people who actually cared about them rather than social obligation. Martha wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Peterson had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Harrison wore his best suit, clearly uncomfortable in anything other than work clothes, but willing to endure it for the occasion. When the circuit preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Richard Sullivan, who had not been invited but had come anyway in a display of spectacularly poor judgment, actually started to stand. Before he could speak, however, Harrison's boss from the Double K Ranch, a grizzled cowboy named Dutch, turned around and fixed Richard with a stare that could have frozen water in July. "Boy, sit down and shut up before you embarrass yourself further," Dutch said in a tone that suggested it was not a suggestion. Richard sat, and the ceremony continued without further incident. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Harrison kissed Martha, the gathered crowd cheered. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding that had been planned for her and Richard, but it was infinitely more meaningful. They held the reception at Sarah's restaurant, which she had closed for the day and decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. There was food, music from a fiddle player someone had hired, and dancing that went on until well after dark. Martha danced with her new husband, with her father, with Dutch, who turned out to be surprisingly graceful for such a rough-hewn man. "You did good, girl," Dutch told her during their dance. "Harrison is one of the best men I know. You two will build something strong." For their wedding night, several of Harrison's friends had conspired to prepare a small cabin on the ranch property, giving them privacy and a place of their own to begin their marriage. It was rustic but clean, with a fire already laid in the hearth and wildflowers on the rough-hewn table. Harrison carried Martha over the threshold, a tradition she would normally have scoffed at, but that seemed right in the moment. He set her down gently, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the reality of what they had done settling over them. "I cannot quite believe you are my wife," Harrison said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I cannot quite believe I found a man who wanted a wife rather than a possession," Martha replied. What followed was tender and passionate, a physical manifestation of the emotional connection they had built over months of courtship. Harrison was patient and attentive, making sure Martha's comfort and pleasure mattered as much as his own. It was everything the whispered warnings from married women had not prepared her for, because those warnings assumed a husband who took without consideration. Harrison gave as much as he took, and Martha discovered that intimacy with the right person was not a duty to be endured but a joy to be celebrated. Afterward, lying in bed with her head on Harrison's chest and his arms around her, Martha felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked, his voice a rumble under her ear. "That I am grateful Richard rejected me," Martha said honestly, "because his rejection led me here to you, to this life. Everything that hurt at the time was actually a gift." Harrison tightened his arms around her. "His loss, my extraordinary gain." They spent 3 days in the cabin, a brief honeymoon before returning to the demands of daily life. They talked, made love, cooked simple meals together, and planned their future with the kind of detailed practicality that characterized them both. When they returned to town, it was to move into a small house Harrison had been renting, now their first real home together. Martha continued working at the restaurant, though she and Harrison discussed how that might change as other opportunities arose. Harrison continued working at the Double K Ranch while slowly improving the land he was buying on a payment plan. The first months of marriage had their adjustments, as all marriages do. Martha was used to living alone or with other women, and sharing space with a man required negotiation and compromise. Harrison was used to a bachelor's freedom, and having to consider another person's schedule and preferences took some getting used to. They had their first real argument in August over money. Harrison wanted to buy a breeding bull he thought would improve his future herd, but Martha worried the expense was premature given their still precarious finances. "We cannot build anything if we are too afraid to invest," Harrison argued. "And we will not build anything if we are too reckless with the little we have," Martha countered. The argument escalated until they were both saying things they did not mean, hurt and frustration overwhelming common sense. Finally, Martha threw up her hands and stormed out of the house, walking fast through town with no particular destination in mind. She ended up at Sarah's restaurant, where her friend took one look at her face and poured her a cup of tea. "Marriage is hard," Sarah said simply. "Even good marriage. My husband and I fought terribly sometimes, but fighting is not the problem. How you fight, whether you still respect each other when angry, that matters." "I called him stubborn and short-sighted," Martha admitted miserably. "He called me controlling and fearful. We both know neither of those things is true, but in the moment, we just wanted to hurt each other." "Then go home and apologize," Sarah advised. "Talk when you are both calm, find a compromise. That is what partners do." Martha went home to find Harrison sitting on their front step, his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard her approach, and she saw that his eyes were red. "I am sorry," they said simultaneously, and despite the tension, both of them laughed weakly. They sat together on the step, shoulders touching, and talked it through properly. They agreed to a compromise where Harrison would buy a less expensive bull now and save for the premium one he really wanted. It was not perfect for either of them, but it was workable, and more importantly, they had navigated their first real conflict without damaging what they had built together. "I never want to go to bed angry with you," Harrison said. "Life is too uncertain, and I need you to know every day how much you mean to me." "Then we make a promise," Martha said. "No matter how angry we get, we talk it through before sleep. We do not let hurt fester." They shook hands solemnly, sealing the promise. Then Harrison pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Martha Kane, even when you are being controlling and fearful." She swatted his arm, but she was smiling. "I love you too, even when you are being stubborn and short-sighted." Fall came to the Owens Valley, with its spectacular display of gold and red in the cottonwoods that lined the creeks and irrigation ditches. Harrison's land began to take shape as he worked every spare moment fencing, building a small barn, preparing for the day when they could move there permanently. In October, Martha realized she had missed her monthly cycle. Then she missed the next one. By November, there was no denying what her body was telling her. She was pregnant. She told Harrison on a Sunday afternoon as they worked together on the ranch property. He was repairing fence while she cleared brush, both of them enjoying the physical labor and the rare time together. "Harrison, I need to tell you something," Martha said, setting down her tools. He looked up immediately, attuned to the seriousness in her tone. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said quickly. "At least, I do not think anything is wrong, but our life is about to change significantly." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by joy so pure it transformed his face. "A baby! We are having a baby, we are," Martha confirmed, and then she was in his arms, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. "I am going to be a father," Harrison said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Martha asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know we did not plan this so soon, and with money still tight and so much work to do on the ranch." Harrison cupped her face in his hands. "I am happier than I have words to express." "Yes, the timing could be easier, but when is timing ever perfect? We will figure it out just like we figure everything else out. Together." The pregnancy progressed through winter, and Martha continued working at the restaurant despite her growing belly, though Sarah fussed over her constantly and insisted she take frequent breaks. Harrison became almost comically protective, worrying about her lifting anything heavy or being on her feet too long. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Martha reminded him when his hovering became particularly intense. "I am not fragile." "I know you are not fragile," Harrison agreed, "but you are carrying our child and I am allowed to worry. Humor me." In February, they moved into a small cabin on the ranch property, finally living on their own land even though it was far from finished. It was cold and drafty and required hauling water from the creek, but it was theirs, and Martha loved it with a fierceness that surprised her. The baby came in late April during a spring storm that turned the roads to mud and made getting help complicated. Sarah made it to the cabin, as did the midwife Mrs. Peterson had sent for, and between them they guided Martha through the long, painful process of bringing new life into the world. Harrison waited outside, pacing despite the rain, until finally, just before dawn, he heard the thin, outraged cry of his newborn child. Sarah opened the door, her face exhausted but joyful. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife wants you." Harrison entered the cabin to find Martha propped up in bed, pale and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him, and the expression on her face was one of fierce, protective love. "Meet your son," she said softly. Harrison approached almost reverently, looking down at the small, red face of his child. The baby had dark hair like his own and was already squinting at the world with what looked like suspicion. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe we made this." They named him Henry David Kane, after Thoreau, whose writings about independence and living deliberately had resonated with both of them. Little Henry was a demanding baby, strong-lunged and particular about his needs, but he was loved beyond measure. Martha discovered that motherhood did not diminish her as she had feared, but expanded her understanding of herself. She was still capable, still independent, still driven, but now those qualities were in service of not just herself but her family. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, and looking at his son with an awe that never seemed to diminish. Sarah hired additional help at the restaurant, allowing Martha to scale back her hours and spend more time with Henry while still maintaining the work she valued. It was a delicate balance, but they made it work through communication and flexibility, and a shared commitment to building a life that honored both their individual needs and their partnership. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew too. Harrison's careful breeding program began paying off with quality cattle that fetched premium prices. They added chickens for eggs, a milk cow for Henry, and a growing string of horses that were gaining recognition for their intelligence and temperament. In 1886, when Henry was 2 years old and running around the ranch like a tiny dictator, Martha discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because life was more settled. Their daughter, Margaret Rose Kane, was born in December, arriving quickly and efficiently as though she did not want to cause undue fuss. Where Henry had been loud and demanding, Maggie was serene and observant, her dark eyes seeming to take in everything around her with calm consideration. "She has your temperament," Harrison told Martha as they watched their daughter sleep peacefully despite her brother's enthusiastic shouting nearby. "Henry got my dramatic tendencies, but Maggie is all you, competent and unflappable." With 2 children and a growing ranch, life became a carefully choreographed dance of responsibilities and joys. Martha eventually stopped working at the restaurant entirely, though she maintained the business accounts for Sarah and consulted on expansion plans. Her days were filled with children, animals, cooking, cleaning, and the 1,000 other tasks that running a ranch required. But Harrison made sure it never became the kind of drudgery that consumed women into invisible servitude. He hired help when they could afford it, insisted Martha take time for herself, and made it clear to Henry and later Maggie that their mother was to be respected not just for her role as a parent, but for her capabilities as a full partner in the ranch operation. The children grew up watching their parents work side by side, discussing decisions, disagreeing sometimes but always with respect, and demonstrating what a true partnership looked like. Henry inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's head for numbers. Maggie proved to have a gift for training dogs and an artist's eye for the landscape that surrounded them. The ranch prospered, not spectacularly but steadily. By 1890, they owned their land outright, had a solid herd of cattle, and were known throughout the Owens Valley for quality horses. Other ranchers came to Harrison for advice, and more than a few ranchers' wives sought out Martha to ask how she managed to maintain her own identity while being a wife and mother. "You marry the right man," Martha always said. "Someone who sees you as a partner, not a subordinate. And you communicate, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. You build something together that makes both of you stronger rather than diminishing either one." They occasionally saw Richard Sullivan in town, and the encounters were always awkward but no longer painful. Richard had married eventually, a young woman from a prominent family who seemed exactly the kind of submissive wife he had wanted. Martha felt only pity when she saw them together, the wife always a step behind, never speaking unless spoken to. That could have been her life, she thought, and felt grateful all over again for the rejection that had seemed so devastating at the time. In 1892, Sarah decided to sell the restaurant and return to San Francisco, where her extended family had established a thriving community. It was bittersweet, saying goodbye to the woman who had given Martha a chance when she desperately needed one, but they promised to write and stay connected. At the farewell dinner Sarah hosted, she pulled Martha aside. "I want you to know how proud I am of you," Sarah said. "That day I offered you a job, I saw potential, but what you have built exceeds anything I imagined. You have created a life of meaning and love, and you have done it without compromising who you are. That is no small thing." "I could not have done it without you," Martha said, hugging her friend tightly. "You gave me the space to become who I was meant to be." "You would have found your way eventually," Sarah replied, "but I am glad I could help smooth the path." The years continued their steady march. Henry grew tall and serious, with his father's build and his mother's analytical mind. At 16, he was already being courted by neighboring ranches who wanted him to work with their horses. Maggie, at 14, was a force of nature, all wild curls and fierce opinions and artistic talent that was beginning to attract notice beyond the valley. Martha looked at her children and marveled at how different they were from the constrained, diminished versions of themselves they might have been if she had married Richard. They were growing up knowing that capability was not limited by gender, that partnership meant mutual respect, that love and independence were not mutually exclusive. Harrison, now in his 40s, had silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But Martha thought he had never been more handsome. He still looked at her like she hung the moon, still consulted her on every major decision, still made sure she knew she was valued. One evening in the summer of 1894, after the children had gone to bed and they were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge over the Sierra, Harrison took Martha's hand. "You remember that walk we took after Christmas when I told you I loved you?" he asked. "Of course," Martha said. "I remember every detail of that day. I told you that I admired your strength," Harrison continued. "That I saw you, really saw you. I meant it then, but I had no idea how much deeper that truth would go. Martha, you have exceeded every hope I had for what our life could be. You have made me better, made our children better, made everything you touch better. And I am grateful every single day that Richard Sullivan was fool enough to let you go. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. After 15 years of marriage, after all the daily intimacies and shared struggles and accumulated history, he could still make her feel like the most treasured person in the world. "I am grateful too," she said, "for all of it, for the heartbreak that led me to Sarah's restaurant, for the strength I did not know I had until I needed it, for you, showing up every morning and seeing me for who I actually was, for this life we built together." They sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching the stars wheel overhead in the vast desert sky. The ranch around them was quiet except for the occasional low of cattle, the distant yip of coyotes, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There was a drought in 1896 that tested their resilience and forced difficult decisions about herd size. Maggie went through a rebellious phase at 17 that resulted in several tense confrontations about appropriate behavior for young women, though Martha sympathized with her daughter's frustration at social constraints. Henry fell in love with a girl from Bishop, and Harrison and Martha navigated the strange territory of watching their son become a man with his own life separate from theirs. But through it all, the foundation they had built together remained solid. They argued sometimes, disagreed on approach, frustrated each other in the way that people living in close quarters inevitably do. But they never lost sight of the fundamental respect and love that anchored their marriage. In 1898, Henry married his sweetheart Elizabeth in a ceremony held at the ranch. Watching her son pledge his life to someone else, Martha was struck by how much he had learned from observing his parents' relationship. The vows he wrote himself spoke of partnership and mutual respect, and Elizabeth beamed at him with the kind of clear-eyed love that suggested she knew exactly what she was getting and wanted it anyway. "We raised him right," Harrison murmured in Martha's ear during the reception. "He will be a good husband." "We did," Martha agreed, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. Maggie, meanwhile, announced at 19 that she wanted to go to San Francisco to study art, a declaration that sent ripples of scandal through the community. Young women from the Owens Valley did not go to the city alone to pursue creative careers. It was not done. But Martha and Harrison, remembering all the times someone had told them what was not done, supported their daughter's ambitions. They helped her make connections through Sarah's family, ensured she had enough money to live modestly, and sent her off with their blessing and their warnings to be careful. "Are we doing the right thing?" Harrison asked after they had put Maggie on the train to San Francisco, watching it disappear into the distance. "We are letting our daughter become who she is meant to be," Martha said. "Just like you let me. How could that be anything but right?" With the children launched into their own lives, Martha and Harrison found themselves alone together for the first time in nearly 2 decades. It was a strange adjustment, the quiet house, the lack of constant demands on their attention, but it was also a gift. They rediscovered each other, not as parents or ranch partners, but as the man and woman who had fallen in love over coffee and conversation. They took long rides into the mountains, just the two of them. They read books aloud to each other in the evenings. They made love with the freedom of knowing they would not be interrupted. "I am falling in love with you all over again," Harrison told her one night, and Martha understood exactly what he meant. The love had never gone away, but it had been transformed by years and responsibilities. Now, it was transforming again into something new and equally precious. Henry and Elizabeth gave them their first grandchild in 1900, a daughter named Sarah after the woman who had given Martha her chance. Becoming a grandmother felt surreal to Martha, a marker of time passing that seemed impossible even as she held the tiny baby in her arms. "You were not much older than this when I met you," she told baby Sarah, marveling at the passage of years. "And now your grandmother is the age my mother was then. Time is a strange thing." Maggie came home for the birth, and Martha hardly recognized her daughter at first. City life had polished away some of the rough edges, and Maggie carried herself with an artist's confidence. She had sold several paintings, she reported, and was making a name for herself in certain circles. "Are you happy?" Martha asked her daughter during a quiet moment alone. "Extraordinarily," Maggie replied. "I know people here think I am strange, choosing art over marriage. But I cannot imagine any other life. I am doing exactly what I am meant to do." "Then you are richer than most people ever get to be," Martha told her. The new century brought changes to the Owens Valley. Los Angeles began its aggressive acquisition of water rights, a development that would eventually devastate the region's agriculture. Harrison and Martha, now in their 40s and 50s respectively, had to navigate these changes carefully to preserve what they had built. But they had weathered challenges before and would weather these too. They adapted, diversified, made difficult decisions about reducing their herd and focusing more on horse breeding. It was not the future they had imagined, but they faced it together, just as they had faced everything else. In 1905, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Martha back to the spot where he had first told her he loved her. The town had grown around them, but this particular piece of land at the edge of Lone Pine remained unchanged, still offering unobstructed views of the Sierra. "I have been thinking about that day," Harrison said, holding both her hands in his. "About how terrified I was that you would laugh at me or reject me. About how sure I was that loving you was worth the risk even if you did not love me back. I cannot imagine any version of my life that did not include loving you," Martha said honestly. "We have had a good life, have we not?" Harrison asked. "Despite the challenges, despite the struggles, it has been good." "It has been better than good," Martha replied. "It has been extraordinary. We built something real, Harrison, something that mattered. We raised children who know their own worth. We created a partnership that never diminished either of us. We loved each other well. What more could anyone ask for?" Harrison pulled her close, and they stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. 20 years of marriage, and Martha still felt her heart skip when he held her. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones both joyful and sorrowful. Henry and Elizabeth had 2 more children, giving Martha and Harrison a total of 3 grandchildren to spoil. Maggie married eventually, at 32, to a fellow artist who understood and supported her need for creative independence. Sarah Chen passed away in 1908, and Martha traveled to San Francisco for the funeral, weeping for the woman who had changed her life with a simple offer of employment. The ranch continued to thrive in its own way, adapted to new realities but still productive, still beautiful. Harrison trained his grandson to work with horses, passing down knowledge and skill that had been honed over decades. Martha kept the books, managed accounts, and served as an informal advisor to several young women in the valley who were trying to forge their own paths. In 1910, the town threw a celebration for Harrison and Martha's 25th wedding anniversary. It was a testament to how much had changed that the same community that had once scandalized over Martha's broken engagement now held her up as an example of success. The party was held in the town square, and it seemed like half the Owens Valley turned out. "Speech," someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant until Martha, blushing, stood to address them. "25 years ago, I stood in this town heartbroken and humiliated," she began. "I had been rejected for being too independent, and I thought my life was over. But that rejection was the greatest gift I ever received, because it led me to discover who I really was and what I was truly capable of. It led me to Sarah Chen, who gave me a chance when no one else would. And it led me to Harrison, who saw my strength and said he admired it. She looked at her husband, who was watching her with the same intensity he had brought to every moment of their marriage. Harrison Kane taught me that love does not require diminishment, that a true partner lifts you up rather than cutting you down, that independence and intimacy are not mutually exclusive. Together, we built a life that honored both our individual worth and our partnership. We raised children who know their own value. We created something lasting. She paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her words. To anyone here, particularly any young woman here who has been told she is too much or too little, too loud or too quiet, too ambitious or too meek, I want you to know this. The right person will admire your strength, whatever form that strength takes. Wait for that person. Demand that respect. Build a life that makes you proud. You deserve nothing less. The crowd erupted in applause and Martha sat down, Harrison's arm immediately coming around her shoulders. "That was perfect," he murmured into her hair. "You are perfect." They danced that night under strings of lights someone had hung in the square, and Martha felt like she was 23 again, newly in love and amazed by her good fortune. The years had been kind to them in the ways that mattered most. They had lines on their faces and aches in their joints and the accumulated weight of experience, but they also had love that had deepened rather than faded, respect that had been earned and maintained, and the knowledge that they had built something worthwhile. As the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, Harrison pulled Martha close for one last dance. The musicians were playing a slow waltz, and they moved together with the ease of decades of partnership. "What are you thinking about?" Martha asked, her cheek against his chest. "About that terrified cowboy who fell in love with the strongest woman he had ever met," Harrison replied. "About how lucky he was that she loved him back, about how every single day since has been a gift." "We still have years ahead of us," Martha said. "This is not an ending." "No," Harrison agreed. "Not an ending, just another chapter in a very good story." They continued dancing as the stars wheeled overhead and the Sierra Nevada mountains stood sentinel around them, ancient and enduring. The life they had built together was its own kind of endurance, weathering storms and droughts and the thousand challenges that tried to break lesser partnerships. But they had never been lesser. From that first conversation in a small restaurant, they had recognized something in each other that was worth nurturing. Martha's strength and Harrison's respect for it had been the foundation, but what they built on that foundation was something richer and more complex. A true marriage of equals, a partnership that made both of them better, a love that had proven itself over and over again through the crucible of daily life. The years that followed their 25th anniversary were gentle ones, blessed with the kind of peace that comes after decades of hard work. The ranch ran itself mostly, with Henry handling the daily operations and Harrison serving more as advisor than active foreman. Martha spent her days as she pleased, dividing time between grandchildren, community work, and the quiet pleasures of a life well lived. They still took their evening walks together, still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still reached for each other in the night. The passion had mellowed into something deeper and more comfortable, but it had not disappeared. They were still lovers as well as partners, still finding joy in the physical expression of their emotional bond. In 1915, they celebrated their 30th anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. 30 years of marriage, and Martha could not imagine any other life she might have lived. "No regrets?" Harrison asked, as if reading her mind. "Not a single one," Martha replied firmly. You. Only that I did not meet you sooner, Harrison said. That we could not have more years together. Then we had better make the most of the years we have, Martha said, and pulled him in for a kiss that proved they were not too old for passion after all. They continued making the most of their years together, savoring each day as the gift it was. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed new babies into the family, and took pride in the legacy they were leaving behind. Not just the ranch, though that was part of it, but the example they had set of what marriage could be when it was built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Martha lived to be 78 years old, healthy and sharp-minded until a sudden illness took her quickly in the spring of 1923. She died in their bed in their home with Harrison holding her hand and their children gathered around them. Her last words were, "I had a wonderful life. I have no complaints." Harrison followed her 18 months later, his heart simply giving out as if it had decided there was no point continuing without her. He was 79, and those who knew him said he had been ready to go, that he missed Martha too much to want to linger without her. They were buried together on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their births and deaths. But their true legacy was not in stone. It lived in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who carried forward the lessons they had taught about strength and respect and partnership. It lived in the women throughout the Owens Valley, who had taken courage from Martha's example to forge their own paths. It lived in the memory of a love that had proven that independence and intimacy were not opposing forces, but complementary ones. Years later, people in Lone Pine still told the story of Martha Fairchild, who had been rejected for being too independent, and Harrison Kane, who had said he admired her strength. They told it to young women who were afraid to be themselves and young men who needed to understand what true strength looked like. They told it as a reminder that the best love does not diminish but amplifies, does not constrain but frees, does not demand conformity but celebrates authenticity. And somewhere in the high desert of California, in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountains, the land they had loved and worked continued, changed by time but still beautiful, still enduring, a physical reminder that what is built with love and respect can withstand anything the world throws at it. The story of Martha and Harrison became part of the mythology of the Wild West, a counterbalance to tales of violence and lawlessness. Theirs was a story of different kind of strength, the kind that built rather than destroyed, that nurtured rather than conquered. It was a love story, yes, but more than that. It was a story about the power of truly seeing another person and choosing to honor rather than diminish what you see. In the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the ranch or the children or the material success, but the proof that love could be a force for liberation rather than constraint, that the right partnership could make both people stronger, that admiring someone's strength was the surest foundation for a lasting love. And in a time and place where women were often expected to make themselves smaller to fit into the spaces men carved out for them, Martha Fairchild Kane had blazed a different trail. She had been too independent for the wrong man and exactly right for the man who truly deserved her. She had built a life of meaning and purpose without sacrificing love, had raised children who knew their own worth, and had loved a man who admired her strength until the very end. It was, by any measure, a life extraordinarily well lived. And the love story at its center remained, decades after both of them were gone, an inspiration to anyone who believed that the best relationships were those where both partners stood tall together, rather than one diminishing to elevate the other. The ranch passed through generations of the Kane family, each inheriting not just land and livestock, but also the values Martha and Harrison had embodied. The small cabin where they had first lived together was preserved and maintained, a museum of sorts to remind future generations of where it all began. Visitors could still see the rough-hewn table where they had eaten their first meals together, the fireplace where they had warmed themselves through harsh winters, the bed where their children had been conceived and born. But more than physical spaces, what endured was the story itself, passed down through family lore and community memory. It became a touchstone, a reminder that even in the harsh realities of the Wild West, love could flourish when it was rooted in respect. That strength could be admired rather than feared. That partnership could elevate both people rather than reducing either one. And so the story of Martha Fairchild, who was rejected for being too independent, and Harrison Kane, the cowboy who said, "I admire your strength," became part of the permanent record of the American West. Not because it was dramatic or violent or spectacular, but because it was true. Because it demonstrated that the most radical act of all might be choosing to love someone for exactly who they are, strength and independence and all, and building a life together that honored both individual worth and shared commitment. In the high desert of California, where the Sierra Nevada mountains still stand sentinel over the land, their story remains. A testament to the power of genuine partnership, the importance of mutual respect, and the transformative possibility of a love that sees clearly and chooses to admire rather than diminish. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, not because of its violence or drama, but because of its quiet, enduring strength, just like the love of Martha and Harrison themselves.